Beer has been a part of human civilization since 7500 BC, with the world's first beer brewery, the Weihenstephan Brewery, being able to trace its roots back to 1040 AD. The world's largest brewing company being Anheuser-Busch Company, and the industry as a whole are booming, being worth $246.5 billion according to the Beer Institute. As beer has developed into such a large industry, the amount of people interested in partaking in it has grown rapidly as well. The microbrewery movement really gained traction in the 1970s in the United Kingdom and grew to be known as craft beer. The Brewers Association defines American craft brewers as small, independent, and traditional. Small is defined as annual production of 6 million barrels of beer or less. Independent is defined as at least 75% owned or controlled by a craft brewer. And traditional is defined as brewing in which at least 50% of the beer's volume consists of traditional or innovative ingredients. For our experiment, we selected 3 mass market beers and 3 craft beers, and we had people see if they could blindly taste them and then identify them as mass market or microbrewed. We wanted 3 different types of beers, so we picked 2 lagers, 2 island lagers, and 2 Belgian whites. When choosing a mass market beer, we decided Anheuser-Busch is very important to include since it's the largest beer company in the world, so we included 2 of their beers. We chose a standard Budweiser lager, which is the most well-known beer in the world. In comparison, for our microbrewed lager, we chose a Samuel Adams Boston Lager. Landshark is also brewed by Anheuser-Busch, so we chose it for an island lager. In comparison, we used the Longboard, which is a Hawaiian-made island lager that is microbrewed. The last 2 beers that we chose were Belgian whites, with Hell's Bell representing the Raleigh microbrew and Blue Moon representing the macrobrew. We then had our participants take a brief survey about their drinking habits and expenditures so that we could test a few hypotheses. Our 3 hypotheses were as follows. A. People who openly consider themselves beer drinkers will be able to identify more of the beers we have them taste. B. People who consider a microbrewed beer as their personal preference will be able to identify more of the beers we have them taste. And C. People who spend more on beer weekly will be able to identify more of the beers as we have them taste. Here is what we found.
I said, what you got? He said, well, let's see. We got Lone Star, PBR, Rolling Rock, Shiner Bock, Moose, Drew, O'Doul's, Heffenbeissen, Ziegenbach, Keystone, Coors Light. Of course, we got Red Stripe, Amstel, Amsterdam in the tall can, Michelob, Miller Lite, Guinness by the pint glass, Doppelbock, Lager, take his Waller, cause it's going fast.
Alright, Zach, so I put 6 beers in front of you. What was your process of determining if one was craft versus if one was macro brew?
Okay, so first I went for the Belgian. I tried to separate the Belgians, and then I tried to find the one that had a more unique taste, and I put that as a micro. And then the other one that I thought was Belgian, obviously I put as a macro. And then again for the island lager, again it was more of like what had more of a taste. So pretty much it was, I tried to separate them based on what they were and then tried to figure out what had a better taste, and I assume that would be with the micro.
Barkeep grin said that ain't all. We got Rio Grande, River Rock, Tecate with the twist top, Dos Perros, Dos Equis, Foster if you're Aussie, Bud Light in the new Zane Williams koozie, a dozen wheat beers on tap if you choose. You got Heineken, Killian's,
First off, this was a fun project to do, and all of our volunteers, enthused or not, were greatly appreciated. They helped us come to conclusions about our originally formed hypotheses. To recap, we hypothesized that A, those that classify themselves as drinkers would be more accurate in identifying the difference between micro and macro brews. B, that people who select craft beers as their preference were more likely to determine a macro versus micro. And C, people who spend more money on beer will be able to identify the difference between micro and macro brews at a more consistent rate. Hypothesis A had our highest p-value of 0.120. Granted, this is still an insignificant value. We were impressed with the results that we gathered. Anyone who only scored a 1 to 2, meaning that they only got 2 of the 6 accurately labeled, labeled themselves as non-beer drinkers, while those who got all of the beers correct referred to themselves as beer drinkers. Hypothesis B, those that say they prefer craft to macro, was an absolute bust. We had an absurd p-value of 0.644. This is because of our small sample size, but it was also because people scored all over the spectrum. Go figure. People just want to say they like to quote-unquote the better product. In hindsight, this makes sense. People are going to want to say they know what they are doing. I know I do. Our last hypothesis, C, stated that those who spend more money on beer will be able to identify the beers more consistently, had a p-value of 0.310. Again, we had a high p-value because of our low number of participants. However, we still had a good turnout for this hypothesis. Most all of the high spenders could identify their beers, and those that didn't spend much really didn't have the ability to discern their differences. Overall, despite our low p-values, two of our hypotheses held merit. A and C both had statistics behind them, just not the p-value. B was an absolute failure, and we are ashamed. So very ashamed. We were happy that two of our hypotheses held solid ground, and they both hold the same pattern. The more you are exposed to beer, the more likely you are going to be able to tell the difference between a macro and micro brew.